My name is Luciana Ibarra. I am 26 years old, and I used to believe that the best thing you could do in a new job was stay small until someone told you it was safe to be larger. I was wrong. I want to tell you what I actually was before I tell you what happened, because the way the story got passed around later, on the company Slack, in the LinkedIn comments, eventually in places I never expected, it got simplified in the retelling. Shy intern sees deaf man steps up gets rewarded. That is the outline. It is not wrong exactly. It just leaves out the specific texture of who I was and why I almost didn't do anything at all. I had a master's degree in organizational management from Georgia State that I had finished the previous May, and I had taken this internship because it paid $22 an hour and because the division head, a precise and demanding woman named Sandra Okafor, had a reputation in my program for taking her interns seriously. She had told me in my interview that she expected interns to do real work, not busy work, and that if I showed up and kept my head down and asked good questions, she would make sure I left with something worth putting on a resume. I had taken that guidance and applied it thoroughly and slightly too literally. I ate lunch at my desk 4 days out of 5. I took detailed notes in every meeting I was permitted to attend. I was not antisocial. I was careful. There is a difference, and I had learned it the hard way at a previous job, a retail management position I had held for 2 years after undergrad, where being visibly competent too early had made me a target for a supervisor who felt threatened by it. I had carried that lesson into Hargrove and Strand. I want to ask you something before I keep going. If you've ever been in a room and seen someone get overlooked, and you felt that moment where you had to decide whether it was your problem to solve, stay with me. Because what I did next was not heroic. It was just the only thing I could think of that made sense. I had started my internship at Hargrove and Strand Consulting 11 weeks before the day this happened. Hargrove and Strand was a mid-sized operations consulting firm in Atlanta, not a household name, not a startup, the kind of company that had been doing serious work for 30 years without needing anyone outside the industry to recognize it. About 280 employees across 3 floors of a glass and steel building in Midtown, the kind of building where the lobby had a marble floor and a security desk and a reception area with low furniture that nobody ever sat in. There was a note card in my wallet from my younger sister Gabriella. I had carried it since the day I moved to Atlanta. I will come back to it. I was a graduate intern in the Process Improvement Division, supervised by a precise and demanding woman named Sandra Okafor, who had told me in my interview that she expected interns to do real work, not busy work, and that if I kept my head down and asked good questions, she would make sure I left with something worth putting on a resume. What nobody at Hargrove and Strand knew about me, what I had not found a natural moment to mention, was that I was fluent in American Sign Language. Not conversational. Actually fluent. My younger sister, Gabriella, had been deaf since birth, and I had grown up signing. By the time I was 10, I was interpreting for her at school when the district's assigned interpreter called in sick. By the time I was 16, I was the person my parents called when any official communication with Gabriella's school required someone who could hold both sides of a complex conversation simultaneously. In my wallet, I kept a note card she had given me when I moved to Atlanta, her handwriting on the front. You know what to do when someone can't be heard. So do it. The ink at the fold had gone faded from opening it. I had not mentioned any of this at Hargrove and Strand because it had not come up and because I did not think it was the kind of thing you led with at a consulting firm. It was a Tuesday in October, just after 2 in the afternoon, when I came down to the lobby to pick up a printed report that had been sent to the wrong floor. The man was already at the reception desk when I stepped out of the elevator. He was older, I would later learn he was 71, with white hair cut close and a dark wool overcoat that had the quality of something bought to last rather than to impress. He was standing at the desk with a small leather portfolio under one arm, and he was signing. Not slowly, not tentatively, but signing the way someone signs when it is simply their language, fluid and efficient, hands moving at a pace that expected comprehension on the other side. Derek, one of the 2 reception staff, was watching him with the particular expression of someone who is trying to be patient and professional while having absolutely no frame of reference for what they are being asked to do. He had both palms flat on the desk, which was his version of stillness under uncertainty. Phyllis, the other, had her headset on and was watching from her peripheral vision without turning her chair. Derek said, "Sir, I'm sorry, I don't understand. Do you have an appointment?" The man stopped signing. He reached into his portfolio and produced a business card, which he set on the desk and pointed to. Derek looked at the card. His expression shifted into the particular blankness of someone who now has more information and is not sure what to do with it. "Okay," Derek said. "Okay, can you hold on 1 second?" He looked at Phyllis. "Do we have anyone who?" He made a vague gesture. Phyllis pulled her headset down. "I can call upstairs," she said. She picked up the phone and dialed an extension. It rang. Nobody answered. She tried a second extension. The man in the overcoat stood at the desk and waited. He was not agitated. He had the stillness of someone who had spent a lifetime in lobbies like this one, waiting for someone to figure out a solution that should have been obvious from the beginning. I was standing 12 feet away with a printed report in my hand. My first thought was that someone upstairs would figure it out. My second thought was that I was an intern and that inserting myself into a lobby situation that had nothing to do with my work was exactly the kind of overreach I had been carefully avoiding for 11 weeks. My third thought arrived about 2 seconds later, and it was simpler than either of them. There was a man standing at a desk who needed something, and I could provide it, and the only reason I was considering not doing so was because I was afraid of being noticed. I walked to the desk. I set my report on the edge of the counter and I looked at the man and I signed, "Hello. I'm Luciana. I work here. Can I help you?" The man's expression changed. Not dramatically, he was not a man given to dramatic expressions, I would learn, but something in his face settled, the way a room settles when a window is opened and the air moves again. He signed back, "Yes. Thank you. I have a 2:30 meeting on the 14th floor. My name is Richard Weston." I turned to Derek. "He has a 2:30 on 14. His name is Richard Weston." Derek typed rapidly. His face did the thing faces do when they locate a name in a system that they should have been able to locate sooner. Yes, he's expected. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Weston, I'll call up right now." I turned back to Mr. Weston and signed, "They're calling upstairs now. Someone will come down for you shortly." He nodded. Then he signed, "How long have you been signing?" "Since I was about 5, I signed." "My sister is deaf." He nodded again, a slow and particular nod. "She's lucky to have you," he signed. "I'm the lucky one," I said. Derek was on the phone. Phyllis was watching us with an expression I couldn't fully read, not unkind, more like someone recalibrating something they had assumed was fixed. I picked up my report from the counter and signed to Mr. Weston that someone would be right down, and he thanked me and I walked back to the elevator. What I did not know, standing at that elevator with the report under my arm, was that the 14th floor was the executive floor, and that the office at the end of the hall on the 14th floor belonged to a man named James Hargrove, the founding partner, the majority owner, the man whose name was on the building's lease. And that James Hargrove had been standing in the lobby, just inside the glass doors that led from the parking structure, for approximately the last 4 minutes. I had not seen him. He had seen everything. The next morning, Sandra Okafor appeared at my desk at 8:47, earlier than I had ever seen her arrive, and said without preamble, "James Hargrove wants to meet with you at 10. I looked up from my screen. "I'm sorry?" 10 o'clock, she said. 14th floor. She paused. "Do you know a Richard Weston?" My chest went still for a moment, just a beat, just the fraction of a second where something uncertain settles into something very certain. "I helped him in the lobby yesterday," I said. "He needed a sign language interpreter." Sandra looked at me for a long moment. "You sign?" "Yes," I said. "I've been fluent since I was a child." She was quiet for another second. Then she said, "You've been here 11 weeks and you didn't mention that." I looked at the edge of my desk and said nothing. She pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was deciding something. Then she said, 10 o'clock. "Don't be late," and she walked back to her office. I had spent 21 years carrying this quietly. The first time I remember understanding that fluency in sign language was something other people did not have, I was 7 years old. Gabriella was 4. We were at a pediatric appointment in the clinic in Marietta where we grew up, and the doctor, a kind, harried man named Dr. Bellamy who treated half the children in our zip code, was trying to explain something to Gabriella about a follow-up test she needed. He had a notepad and was writing things down, which was how he always communicated with her, and Gabriella was getting frustrated because writing is slow and she was 4 and she wanted to understand right now. I climbed off my chair and stood next to Gabriella and started signing what Dr. Bellamy was saying, watching his mouth and his notepad and converting it as fast as I could. Dr. Bellamy stopped writing and watched me for a moment. Then he continued explaining to me, and I was relaying it to Gabriella, and she settled immediately because she was getting information in the language that lived inside her. Dr. Bellamy looked at my mother afterward and said, "How long has she been doing this?" "Since she started talking," my mother said. By the time I was in middle school, I was interpreting at parent-teacher conferences when the school's assigned interpreter was unavailable, which was more often than the school would have liked to admit. I sat in those meetings between my parents and Gabriella's teachers, and I held both sides of the conversation. My parents' questions in English, the teacher's responses, Gabriella's interjections in ASL, all of it moving through me simultaneously. I was 12 the first time I caught an interpreter error that affected Gabriella directly. The school had assigned a certified interpreter for Gabriella's IEP meeting, and in the middle of the meeting the interpreter rendered a key phrase incorrectly, using the sign for optional when the coordinator had said required. I was sitting against the wall because I was not supposed to be in the meeting, but my mother had brought me as backup and I was watching. I caught my mother's eye and shook my head once. She stopped the meeting. The coordinator repeated the phrase. When she said required again, I signed it correctly to Gabriella myself. On the drive home my mother said, "You were right." She said it quietly, the way she said things that were important. "You are always right about this." I had carried that into every room I entered as an adult. I had carried it through 2 years of pro bono interpretation at a legal clinic in Decatur, for Saturday mornings a month, sitting across from deaf clients navigating lease disputes and employment questions, rendering everything accurately enough that the outcome of the meeting was not distorted by translation error. I had carried it through 3 years of Saturday mornings at a medical clinic in Clarkston, 36 Saturdays a year, intake appointments and follow-up consultations where a translation error was not a minor inconvenience but a health outcome. None of that was on my resume. It had not seemed like the kind of thing you put on a consulting resume. The second incident I keep returning to, the one that set the pattern, happened the previous spring, 3 months before I started the internship. A video interview for a different position at a larger firm. The hiring manager had asked me to walk through any special skills or competencies I hadn't covered. I had mentioned ASL fluency. She had paused and then said with genuine pleasantness, "Oh, that's neat. Do you find that comes up much in a professional context?" I had said carefully that it depended on the context and the industry. I did not get the position. I decided afterward to stop volunteering it unprompted until I understood the room I was in well enough to know whether it would be received as an asset or as a footnote. I had been holding it in my pocket at Hargrove and Strand for 11 weeks when Richard Weston walked into the lobby. I had 6 hours before that meeting, which was not enough time to understand what it meant and more than enough time to be afraid of it. I went back to my work and kept my head down, and somewhere inside me I began moving through the years behind me. All the rooms I had been in where what I could do had been invisible, or had been visible and then quietly absorbed by someone else, or had been used without being named. I tried to search Richard Weston's name on the company's internal directory and found nothing, which meant he was not a Hargrove and Strand employee. I searched externally and found a Richard Weston in the operations consulting space, a name attached to a firm called Weston Advisory Group, based in Charlotte, but the search results were sparse and old and I could not tell how current they were. I decided, sitting at my desk with the cursor blinking, that I was not going to prepare for a meeting I did not have enough information to prepare for. I was going to go upstairs and answer questions honestly and not over-explain. That was the most I could do. I thought about the hiring manager the previous spring, who had said, "Oh, that's neat," and moved on to the next question. I thought about 11 weeks of eating lunch at my desk and keeping my head down and waiting for someone to tell me it was safe to be larger. I thought about Gabriella, who had never once waited for a room to tell her she was allowed to need what she needed. Who had simply needed it and found a way and expected the people around her to find a way too. I arrived on the 14th floor at 9:58. The executive floor looked different from the floors I worked on, quieter, with wider hallways and no visible clutter. A woman at the assistant's desk near the elevator, her nameplate said Caroline, looked up when I stepped off and said, "Luciana Ibarra?" "Yes," I said. "Mr. Hargrove will be right with you. Can I get you anything?" "I'm fine," I said. "Thank you." She gestured to a seating area near a window that looked out over Midtown's midday grid. I sat down and set my notebook on my knee and did not open it. James Hargrove opened his office door himself. He was a tall man in his early 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and the unhurried manner of someone who has stopped needing to perform authority because it is simply present without effort. He extended his hand. "Luciana," he said. "Thank you for coming up. I'm James." "Not Mr. Hargrove." "James." I shook his hand and followed him into the office. It was a large room with one glass wall facing the city and bookshelves on the interior walls that were genuinely used, not decorative, books pulled and replaced at different angles, papers tucked into spines as bookmarks. A round table near the window had 4 chairs and a folder on it. He gestured toward the table rather than his desk. "Sit wherever you're comfortable," he said. I sat. He sat across from me and folded his hands on the table and said, "I saw what happened in the lobby yesterday." "I know," I said. "Sandra mentioned you'd been there. Did she tell you who Richard Weston is?" "No," I said. He nodded. "Richard and I built this company together," he said. 31 years ago. He was my co-founder and my partner for 22 years before he retired. He's been deaf since his late 40s, progressive hearing loss. He still consults with me informally a few times a year. He came in yesterday for lunch. I held that for a moment. The man in the wool overcoat. The business card on the desk. The patience in his posture. "He's come into this lobby dozens of times over the years," Hargrove said. "And every time there is some version of what you saw yesterday. Derek trying to figure out what to do, someone calling upstairs, Richard standing at the desk waiting." He opened the folder on the table. "I've been meaning to fix that for 2 years. I have not fixed it." I looked at the folder but did not reach for it. "When I saw you walk up to the desk yesterday," Hargrove said, "my first thought was that you were a member of the reception team I hadn't met. Then I realized you had a badge, and the badge was the wrong color for reception. So I asked Caroline to find out who you were." "I'm an intern," I said. "Process improvement with Sandra Okafor." "I know that now," he said. He looked at me directly. "How long have you been signing?" 21 years, I said. "My younger sister is deaf. I grew up with it." Something moved across his face, not sentimentality, something more precise. "Richard told me about the conversation you had with him. While you were waiting for someone to come down." I thought about what I had signed. I'm the lucky one. It had not been a performance. It had been the true thing. "He said you signed to him the way his daughter signs. Not the way someone signs who learned it as a professional skill. The way someone signs who learned it because someone they love needed them to." My hands were still in my lap. I did not move them. "I want to talk to you about a few things," Hargrove said. He turned the folder so it faced me. "And I want to do it honestly because I think you deserve that." I looked at the folder. On the top sheet, in the clean formatting of an internal HR document, I could read the heading from where I sat. It said, "Internship Conversion, Full-Time Consideration." Below it was my name. I uncapped my pen and set it on the table beside the folder. "Okay," I said. "I'm listening." He turned the folder toward me and started from the top. "I want to be direct with you," he said, "because I think you're the kind of person who does better with directness than with preamble." He paused. "I've been running this company for 31 years. In that time I've hired somewhere around 400 people. Interns, analysts, senior consultants, partners. Most of the mistakes I've made had the same shape. I didn't look carefully enough at what someone was actually doing. I looked at what they were presenting." "That's a common mistake," I said. "It is," he said. "It's also a correctable one." He turned the top sheet so I could read it fully. It was a conversion offer, full-time associate, process improvement division, $68,000 starting salary, standard 90-day review. "That's the first thing," he said. I read the sheet. The numbers were clean and the language was standard and my name was at the top, and I did not let my face do anything I hadn't decided it should do. "What's the second thing?" I said. He placed a second sheet on top of the first, not HR formatting but something closer to a project brief. "A formalized accessibility protocol for the office. Visitor intake, client meetings, internal communications." Hargrove and Richard had been talking about it for 2 years. They'd never had a staff member with ASL fluency, not that they knew of, and the gap had been visible every time Richard walked through the lobby. "He walked through that lobby yesterday," Hargrove said, "and inside 4 minutes you resolved something we've been failing at for years." "I had an advantage," I said. I grew up with the language. I know that, Hargrove said. That's not a disadvantage to this conversation. That's the point of it. He added a third sheet, a single page, briefer than the others. The project scope. 6 months, HR and facilities support. Richard had agreed to consult. He said he would rather work with someone who signs like family than with someone who learned it for a credential. I looked at the 3 sheets on the table in front of me. Can I ask you something? I said. Yes, Hargrove said. You said you've been watching this gap for 2 years. Richard has come through that lobby dozens of times. What made yesterday different from any other day he walked in? Hargrove was quiet for a moment. It was the pause of a man who has the honest answer and is deciding whether to give it. Nothing, he said finally. The gap was the same. Richard's patience was the same. What was different was that someone did something about it before I had to. He looked at me steadily. I've been waiting 2 years for someone inside this building to notice what I noticed and act on it. You acted on it. That's a different kind of employee than I usually find in an intern. I reached forward, pulled the 3 sheets toward me, aligned their edges and set them in a clean stack. I want to accept the associate offer, I said. And the project. I paused. I have one condition. Hargrove's expression sharpened slightly. Go ahead, he said. Derek and Phyllis at the front desk, I said. Whatever accessibility training comes out of this project, they're the first people trained. Not last, not optional. First. They did their jobs yesterday. They just didn't have the tools. Hargrove looked at me for a moment. Then he said, done. He extended his hand across the table. I shook it. One more thing, he said as I was straightening the papers. Richard asked me to give you something. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card, a small note card handwritten. He set it on the table and slid it across. I picked it up. The handwriting was precise and deliberate, the handwriting of someone who has always communicated carefully. It said, "Thank you for seeing me. R.W." I set the note card on top of the stack of papers and held the edge of it for a moment without saying anything. He said you'd know what that meant, Hargrove said. I do, I said. I walked back to Sandra's office and knocked on the open door. She was at her desk with 2 monitors running and a coffee that had gone cold at her elbow. She looked up. I accepted, I said. She looked at me for a moment with the expression she had when she was processing something she had already partially expected. Then she said, good. She picked up her cold coffee. You should have told me you signed. I know, I said. I wasn't sure it mattered here. It matters everywhere, she said. Anything you bring into a room that helps someone else function better, that matters. You're going to have to learn to say that out loud. Yes, I said. She nodded and turned back to her monitors. I went back to my desk and typed to Gabriella, something happened at work today. Call me tonight? She replied in 40 seconds, obviously. What happened? I looked at the note card on top of my notebook. Thank you for seeing me. It's good, I typed. It's really good. I called Gabriella that night from my apartment in East Atlanta, sitting on the floor with my back against the couch the way I always sat when I called her. A habit from childhood, from the years when we did our homework on the floor of our shared bedroom in Marietta. We video called because we always video called. You cannot sign on a voice call. I told her the whole story from the beginning. The lobby, the man in the wool overcoat, the signing, the 8:47 knock at my desk, the 14th floor, the 3 sheets on the table, the note card. Gabriella sat cross-legged on her couch in her apartment in Savannah and watched my hands and my face and did not interrupt, which was her way of listening when something mattered. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she signed. What did you tell him? When he asked how long you'd been signing. 21 years, I signed. Since I was 5. She nodded slowly. You said I was 5 when you started. You were, I signed. I was 5 too. We were both 5. She laughed, the particular laugh she had, which was mostly in her face and her shoulders. Then she sobered and signed. Mom is going to cry. I know, I signed. You have to call her tonight. I will, I signed. Then Gabriella looked at me steadily and signed something she had never signed to me before, not in those exact words. I need to tell you something and I need you to hear it. I waited. You have been doing this your whole life, she signed. Not just the interpreting. All of it. The school meetings and the clinic and the Saturdays and the IEP and the time you caught the interpreter error when you were 12 and mom had to stop the whole meeting. You have been in rooms your entire life making sure I could hear what was being said, and you never once made me feel like it was a burden. You never made me feel like I owed you something for it. I folded my hands in my lap and said nothing for a moment. I know, I signed finally. No, she signed. You don't. You think you know, but you think of it as something you just did. Something obvious. It wasn't obvious. It was a choice every single time, and you made it every single time, and I have never said that to you out loud. I looked at my sister's face on the screen, the face I had been reading since before I could read a sentence, the face that had taught me that language is not just sound, that meaning moves through hands and eyes and the tilt of a chin, that a person is not diminished by silence. You told that man you were the lucky one, Gabriella signed. I heard that part of the story. You said I'm the lucky one. I meant it, I signed. I know you meant it, she signed. But I want you to know I meant it first. I pressed my lips together for a moment. My eyes were doing the thing eyes do when something lands all the way instead of glancing off. I let them. Call Mom, Gabriella signed, with the slightly bossy edge she got when she was trying not to cry herself. Tonight. Before it gets too late. I will, I signed. I called my mother 20 minutes later. She cried before I finished the second paragraph, specifically at the part about Richard Weston's note card. Then she collected herself and said, in the firm voice she used when she had decided something, I always told your father that what you could do for your sister was going to matter to the world someday. You were being a mother, I said. I was being right, she said, and I could hear the smile in it. The accessibility protocol launched 4 months later. Derek and Phyllis were the first people trained, 2 sessions, 3 hours each, foundational ASL for reception contexts. Derek turned out to be a natural. Phyllis learned more slowly but more carefully, and by the end she was more precise than Derek. Richard Weston came into the lobby 3 months after the protocol launched. I was in a meeting upstairs. Derek handled the full intake himself. He told me about it later, quietly, at the end of the day. He said Mr. Weston had smiled when Derek greeted him in ASL. He said it was a real smile, not a polite one. I have thought a lot in the months since this happened about the thing I almost didn't do. I almost walked past the desk. I almost told myself it was not my problem, that someone upstairs would sort it out, that staying small was the safer bet. I had 11 weeks of evidence that staying small was the safe choice in that building, and I had a lifetime of evidence that rooms do not always reward what they cannot see. What I did not have was a reason good enough to stay quiet when a man was standing at a desk unable to be heard. The question I keep sitting with is not whether to keep those things hidden. I know the answer to that now. The question is whether I would have walked up to that desk if I had known James Hargrove was standing by the door. Whether the choice would have been the same if I had known what it was going to mean. I think it would have been. I think Gabriella made sure of that a long time ago. The things we carry quietly, the skills we learned out of love, the hours we spent in rooms making things possible for someone else, the capabilities we tucked away because we weren't sure the current room was ready for them, those things do not disappear when we stop announcing them. They stay in our hands. They come out at the desk when someone needs them, whether we plan to show them or not. I keep a note card in my wallet now. It still says what it always said in Gabriella's handwriting, faded at the fold, you know what to do when someone can't be heard. So do it. I think she knew I would need it. She usually does. Whatever you have been carrying quietly, whatever you learned out of necessity or love or plain stubbornness in the face of a problem that needed solving, I hope you find the desk where it matters. It will come. And when it does, I hope you walk up to it. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Those people exist in every room. This is a fictional story created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental.